Chapter 55. Ezio turned, and in the bedroom of his lodgings, out of sight of Machiavelli, he drew the apple from its secret hiding place. Carefully, he took it out of its container with gloved hands and placed it on the table in his bedroom. Then he concentrated. Very slowly the apple began to glow, and then its light brightened until the room was filled with a cold illumination. Next, images, dim at first and indistinct, flickered onto the wall and resolved themselves into something it had shown Ezio before. It's a strange remote castle in a brown, barren landscape, very old, with a massive outer barbican, 4 main towers, and an impregnable-looking square keep at its centre, he explained to Machiavelli. "Where is that rocker? What is the apple telling us?" Machiavelli shouted from the other room. "It could be anywhere," Ezio muttered to himself. "From the landscape, Syria, perhaps? Or," he said, as with a sudden rush of excitement he remembered Dr. Torreya's words, "Spain!" he shouted to Machiavelli. "Spain!" "Micheletto can't be in Spain." "I am certain he plans to go there. Even so, we don't know where this place is. There are many, many castles in Spain, and many similar to this one. Consult the apple again." But when Ezio tried again, the image remained unchanged. A solidly built castle on a hill, a good 300 years old, surrounded by a little town. The image was monochrome, and all the houses, the fortress, and the countryside were an almost uniform brown. There was only one spot of colour, a bright flag on a pole on the very top of the keep. Ezio squinted at it. A white flag with a red ragged cross in the form of an X. His excitement mounted. "The military standard of King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain." "You can see their standard!" yelled Machiavelli from the other room, his voice contracting with excitement. "Good. Now we know what country. But we still don't know where it is, or why we're being shown it. Is Micheletto on his way there? Ask the apple again." The vision faded and was replaced by a fortified hill town, from whose fort flew a white flag criss-crossed with red chains, their links filled in yellow, which Ezio recognized as the flag of Navarre. Then there was a third and final picture, a massive, wealthy seaport with ships drawn up on a glittering sea and an army gathering, but no clue about the exact location of any of these places. Chapter 50. Your instinct is right. I will guide you and guard you, but I do not belong to you, and soon you must let me go. I have no power over him that controls me. I must obey the will of the master of the apple. Ezio was alone in his secret lodgings, holding the apple in his hands as he tried to use it to help him locate his quarry in Rome, when the mysterious voice came to him again. This time he could not tell if the voice was male or female, or whether it came from the apple or somewhere in his mind. Your instinct is right, but also I have no power over him that controls me. Why then had the apple shown him only hazy images of Micheletto, just enough to tell him that Cesare's henchman was still alive? And it could not, or would not, pinpoint Cesare's location, at least for now. Suddenly Ezio realized something his inner self had always known, that he should not abuse its power by overusing it, and that he should not become dependent on the apple. Ezio knew that it was his own will that had blurred the answers he sought. He must not be slothful. He must fend for himself. One day he would have to again anyway. He thought of Leonardo. What could that man not do if he had the apple? and Leonardo, the best of men, nevertheless invented weapons of destruction as easily as he produced sublime paintings. Might the apple not only have the power to help mankind, but to corrupt it? In Rodrigo's or Cesare's hands, if either of them had ever been able to master it, it could have become the instrument not of salvation, but destruction. Power is a potent drug, and Ezio did not want to fall victim to it. He looked at the apple again. It seemed inert in his hands now, but as he placed it back in its box, he found he could hardly bear to close the lid. What paths could it not open up for him? No, he must bury it. He must learn to live by the code without it. But not yet. He had always sensed in his heart that Micheletto lived. Now he knew it for a fact. And while he lived, he would do his utmost to free his evil master, Cesare. Ezio had not told Pope Julius his full plan. He intended to seek out Cesare and kill him, or die in the attempt. It was the only way. He would use the apple only when he had to. He had to keep his own instincts and powers of deduction sharp in anticipation of the day when the apple would no longer be in his possession. He would hunt down the Borgia diehards in Rome without it. Only if he failed within 3 days to unearth them would he resort to its power again. He still had his friends, the girls of the Rosa in Fiore, La Volpe's thieves, and his fellow assassins. And with their help, how could he fail? Ezio knew that the apple would, in ways he could not fully comprehend, help him, as long as he respected its potential. Perhaps that was its secret. Perhaps no one could ever fully master it, except a member of the race of ancient adepts who had left the world in trust to humanity, to make or break it as their will elected. He closed the lid and locked the box. Ezio summoned a meeting of the Brotherhood on Tiber Island that night. "My friends," he started, "I know how hard we have striven, and I believe that victory may be in sight, but there is still work to do." The others, all except Machiavelli, looked at each other in surprise. "But Cesare is muzzled," cried La Volpe, "for good." "And we have a new pope, who has always been an enemy of the Borgia," added Claudia. "And the French are driven back," put in Bartolomeo. "The countryside is secure, and the Romagna is back in papal hands." Ezio held out a hand to quieten them. "We all know that a victory is not a victory until it is absolute." "And Cesare may indeed be muzzled, but he lives," said Machiavelli quietly. "And Micheletto." "Exactly," Ezio said. "And as long as there are pockets of Borgia diehards, both here and in the Papal States, there is still seed from which a Borgia revival may grow." "You are too cautious, Ezio. We have won," cried Bartolomeo. "Barto, you know as well as I do that a handful of city-states in the Romagna remain loyal to Cesare. They are strongly fortified." "Then I'll go and sort them out." "They will keep. Caterina Sforza's army is not strong enough to attack them from Forli, but I have sent messengers requesting that she keep a close eye on them. I have a more pressing job for you." "Oh, God," thought Ezio. "Why does my heart still skip a beat when I mention her name?" "Which is?" "I want you to take a force to Ostia and keep watch on the port. I want to know about any suspicious ships coming in and out of the harbour. I want you to have messengers on horseback ready to bring news to me here the instant you have anything to report." Bartolomeo snorted. "Sentry duty? Hardly the sort of work for a man of action like me." "You will get as much action as you need when the time is right to move against the rebel city-states I've mentioned. In the meantime, they live in hope, waiting for a signal. Let them live in hope, it'll keep them quiet. Our job is to snuff out that hope, forever. Machiavelli smiled. I agree with Ezio, he said. Well, all right, if you insist, Bartolomeo replied grumpily. Pantasilea will enjoy the sea air after her ordeal. Bartolomeo brightened. I hadn't thought of that. Good. Ezio turned to his sister. Claudia, I imagine the change of regime hasn't affected business at the Rosa and Fiore too badly. Claudia grinned. It's funny how even princes of the church find it hard to keep the devil between their loins in abeyance, however many cold baths they say they take. Tell your girls to keep their ears to the ground. Julius has the College of Cardinals firmly under his control, but he still has plenty of enemies with ambitions of their own, and some of them might just be mad enough to think that if they could free Cesare, they could use him as a means of furthering their own ends. And keep an eye on Johann Burchard, too. What? Rodrigo's master of ceremonies? Surely he's harmless enough. He hated having to organize all those orgies. Isn't he just a functionary? Nevertheless, anything you hear, especially if it's about die-hard factions still at large here in Rome, let me know. It'll be easier now that we no longer have Borgia guards breathing down our necks every minute of the day. Ezio smiled a little absently. I have another question to ask. I have been too busy to visit, and it troubles me. But how is our mother? Claudia's face clouded. She keeps the accounts, but, Ezio, I fear she is failing. She seldom goes out. She speaks more and more often of Giovanni, and of Federico and Petruccio. Ezio fell silent for a moment, thinking of his lost father and brothers. I will come when I can, he said. Give her my love, and ask her to forgive my neglect. She understands the work you have to do. She knows that you do it not only for the good of us all, but for the sake of our departed kinsmen. The destruction of those who killed them shall be their monument, said Ezio, his voice hard. And what of my people? Asked La Volpe. Gilberto, your people are vital to me. My recruits remain loyal, but they see that life returns to normal, and most of them long to return to the lives they led before we persuaded them to join us in the struggle to throw off the Borgia yoke. They retain their skills, but they are not sworn members of the Brotherhood, and I cannot expect them to bear the yoke that we bear, for it is a yoke that only death will relieve us of. I understand. I know the men and women under your command are city-bred. Some country air will make a change. How do you mean? Asked La Volpe suspiciously. Send your best people into the towns and villages around Rome. There will be no need to go further out than Viterbo, Terni, L'Aquila, Avezzano, and Nettuno. I doubt if, beyond the rough circle round Rome that those towns define, we'd find much. There can't be many diehards left, and those there are will want to be within striking distance of Rome. They'll be hard to find. You must try. You know yourself how even a small force in the right place can do untold damage. I'll send out my best thieves and disguise them as peddlers. Report anything you find back to me, especially news of Micheletto. Do you really think he's still out there somewhere? Mightn't he have gone back to Spain? Or at least the Kingdom of Naples? If he isn't dead already, that is. I'm convinced he's still alive. La Volpe shrugged. That's good enough for me. When the others had gone, Machiavelli turned to Ezio and said, What about me? You and I will work together. Nothing would give me greater pleasure, but before we go into details, I have a question. Go ahead. Why not use the apple? Ezio, sighing, explained as best he could. When he'd finished, Machiavelli looked at him, took out his little black notebook, and wrote in it at length. Then he stood up, crossed the room, and sat down next to Ezio, squeezing his shoulder affectionately as he did so. Any such gesture from Machiavelli was as rare as hen's teeth. "Let's get down to business," he said. "This is what I have in mind," said Ezio. "Tell me." "There are women in this city who may help us. We must seek them out and talk to them." "Well, you picked the right man for the job. I am a diplomat." Gaining access to the first was easy. Pope Julius had seen to that. But getting her to talk wasn't. She received them in a sumptuous parlour on the piano nobile of her large house, whose windows on 4 sides provided sublime vistas of the once great city, now part crumbling, but also part magnificent, after the last few popes had poured money into self-aggrandizement. "I don't see how I can help you," she said, after listening to them, although Ezio noticed that she didn't meet their eyes. "If there are pockets of diehards in the city, we need to know about them, Altezza, and we need your help," said Machiavelli. "If we find out later that you have held out on us—" "Don't threaten me, young man," retorted Vanozza. "Dio mio! Do you know how long ago it is since Rodrigo and I were lovers? Well over 20 years. "Perhaps your children?" asked Ezio. She smiled grimly. "I expect you're wondering how a woman like me could have produced such a brood," she said. "But I tell you there is very little Catanei blood in them. Well, in Lucrezia perhaps, but Cesare—" She broke off, and Ezio could see the pain in her eyes. "Do you know where he is?" "I know no more than you do, and I don't care to. It's years since I've even seen him, though we lived in the same city. He's dead to me." Clearly the Pope was being very careful to keep Cesare's whereabouts secret. "Perhaps your daughter knows." "If I don't, why should she? She lives in Ferrara now. You could go and ask her, but it's a long way north, and the Holy Father has forbidden her ever to return to Rome." "Do you see her?" asked Machiavelli. Vanozza sighed. "As I said, Ferrara's a long way north. I don't care to travel much these days." She looked around the room, glancing at the servants who stood near the door, and occasionally at the water clock. She had offered them no refreshment, and seemed eager for them to go. An unhappy woman, she seemed ill at ease and constantly kneaded her hands together. But was that because she was concealing something, or because she was being forced to talk about people she'd clearly rather not discuss? "I have, or rather had, 8 grandchildren," she said unexpectedly. Ezio and Machiavelli knew that Lucrezia had had several children by her various husbands, but few had survived childhood. People said that Lucrezia had never taken pregnancy very seriously, and that she had a habit of partying and dancing right up to the moment of her accouchement. Had that alienated her from her mother? Cesare had a daughter, Louisa, who was a child of 4. "Do you see any of them?" asked Machiavelli. "No. Louisa is still in Rome, I think, but her mother has made sure that she's more French than Italian." She rose then, and the servants, as if on cue, opened the room's ornate double doors. "I wish I could be of more assistance." "We thank you for your time," said Machiavelli dryly. "There are other people you might like to talk to," said Vanozza. "We intend to visit the Princesse d'Albret." Vanozza pressed her lips together. "Buona fortuna," she said, without conviction. "You'd better hurry, too. I hear she's making preparations to leave for France. Perhaps, if I'm lucky, she'll come and say goodbye." Ezio and Machiavelli had risen too, and made their farewells. Once outside in the street, Machiavelli said, "I think we'll have to use the apple, Ezio." "Not yet." "Have it your own way, but I think you're a fool. Let's go and see the princess. Lucky we can both speak French." "Charlotte d'Albret won't be leaving for France today. I've got men watching her palazzo. There's someone else I want to see first. In fact, I'm surprised Vernozza didn't mention her." "Who?" "Giulia Farnese. Doesn't she live in Carbognano these days?" "My spies tell me she's in town, so we ought to take advantage of that." "What makes you think we'll get any more out of her than we got out of Vernozza?" Ezio smiled. Giulia was Rodrigo's last mistress, and he was passionate about her. "I remember when the French captured her. He was beside himself. And then the French foolishly ransomed her for 3,000 ducats. He'd have paid 20 times that amount to get her back. He'd probably have struck any kind of deal they wanted. But I guess that's what happens when your mistress is over 40 years younger than you are. You get besotted. It didn't stop him dumping her when she turned 25, though. Yes, she was too old for him by then. Let's hurry." They made their way north, through the narrow streets in the direction of the Quirinale. On the way, Machiavelli noticed that Ezio was becoming increasingly ill at ease. "What's the matter?" he asked. "Have you not noticed anything?" "What?" "Don't look round." Ezio was terse. "No?" "I think we're being followed. By a woman." "Since when?" "Since we left Vernozza's palazzo." "One of her people?" "Perhaps." "Alone?" "I think so." "Then we'd better shake her." Impatient though they were to get on, they slowed their pace, looking in shop windows and even pausing at a wine booth. There, over the rim of his beaker, Ezio caught sight of a tall, athletically built, blonde woman dressed in a good but unassuming dark green robe of a lightweight material. She'd be able to move fast in clothes like that if the need arose. "I've got her," he said. They both scanned the wall of the building against which the booth was erected. It was a new place, constructed in a fashionably rusticated style of large roughened slabs of stone separated by sunken joints. At intervals, iron rings for tethering horses had been let into the wall. It was perfect. They made their way to the back of the booth, but there was no way out there. "We'll have to be quick," said Machiavelli. "Watch me," replied Ezio, putting his beaker down on a table near the entrance. A few seconds later he was halfway up the wall with Machiavelli close behind him. Bystanders gaped as the two men, their capes fluttering in the breeze, disappeared over the rooftops, leaping across alleyways and streets, sending tiles skeetering down to smash on the cobbles, or flop in the mud of unmade lanes as the people below ducked or jumped out of the way. Even if she'd been able to, the woman couldn't climb vertical walls in a long skirt. But Ezio saw that her dress had a carefully disguised slit to the thigh on one side, enabling her to run, and she was tearing through the streets after them, thrusting aside anyone who got in her way. Whoever she was well trained. At last they lost her. Breathing hard, they came to a halt on the roof of Sant Niccolo de Portis, and lay down flat, keenly scanning the streets below. There seemed to be no one unduly suspicious amongst the citizens in the streets, though Ezio thought he recognized two of La Volpe's thieves working the crowd, using sharp little knives to cut purses. Presumably they were two who hadn't been selected to go out into the surrounding countryside, but he'd have to ask Gilberto about that later. "Let's go down," suggested Machiavelli. "No. It's easier to stay out of sight up here, and we haven't far to go." She didn't seem to have much trouble following us. Lucky for us there was that roof with a high wall round it where we could change direction without her noticing. Ezio nodded. Whoever she was, she'll be reporting back by now. He wished she were on their side. As things stood, they'd have to get to the large apartment Giulia kept in Rome, and then get out of the Quirinale district fast. Maybe he should detail a couple of his recruits to watch their backs on any future forays. The Borgia diehards were lying low under the new pope's tough regime, but only to lull the authorities into a false sense of security. Giulia's first husband, Orsino Orsini, had been happy to turn a blind eye to the affair his 19-year-old wife had embarked on with the 62-year-old Rodrigo Borgia. She had a daughter, Laura, but no one knew if she was the child of Orsino or Rodrigo. Rodrigo, despite being a Valencian by birth, had risen through the church until he controlled the Vatican's purse strings, and he had shown his gratitude to his delicious young mistress by installing her in a brand-new house, which she'd long since been obliged to quit, conveniently close to the Vatican, and by making her brother Alessandro a cardinal. The other cardinals called him the Cardinal of the Skirts behind his back, though of course never in Rodrigo's presence. Giulia they called the Bride of Christ. Ezio and Machiavelli dropped to the ground in the piazza onto which the princess's apartment block fronted. A couple of papal guards stood nearby, but otherwise the square was deserted. The guards' tunics bore on their shoulders the crest of the Della Rovere family, a massive oak tree, root and branch, now surmounted by the triple tiara and the keys of St. Peter. Ezio recognized the men. 6 months earlier, they'd been in Borgia livery. How times had changed, as now they saluted him, and he acknowledged them. "Fuckers," said Machiavelli under his breath. "A man's got to work," said Ezio. "I'm surprised that you, of all people, can take issue with such a bagatelle. Come on." They'd arrived without due notice, and it took some trouble to convince the Farnese attendants, 6 blue fleur-de-lis ranged on a yellow background on their capes, to admit them, but as Ezio knew, Signora Farnese was at home. She received them in a room that was half as gaudy but twice as tasteful as Lavanozza's. At 30, she had more than retained the beauty of her youth, and the intelligence that informed it. Despite them being unexpected guests, the Signora had moscato and panpettati e mielati served for them immediately. It soon became clear that she knew nothing and was innocent of any Borgia taint, despite her previous closeness to that execrable family, as Machiavelli called them. Machiavelli saw that she had moved on, and when he and Ezio asked her about her once close friendship with Lucrezia, all she said was, "What I saw of her was her good side. I think she fell too much under the bullying sway of her father and brother. Thank God she is rid of them." She paused. If only she had met Pietro Bembo earlier. Those two were soulmates. He might have taken her to Venice and saved her from her dark side. "Do you see her still?" "Alas, Ferrara is so far to the north, and I have my hands full running Carboniano." "Even friendships die, Ezio Auditore." An image of Caterina Sforza blew into his mind before he had a chance to extinguish it. Ah, God, how the thought of her caught at his heart still. It was late afternoon by the time they left. They kept a close eye out for anyone shadowing them, but there was nobody. "We must use the apple," said Machiavelli again. "This is but the first day of 3. We must learn to trust ourselves and our own intelligence, and not lean on what has been vouchsafed us. The matter is pressing. One more appointment today, Niccolo, then, perhaps, we shall see." The Princesse d'Albret, Dame de Chaloux, Duchess of Valentinois, was, according to the gatekeepers of her opulent villa in the Pinciano district, not at home. But Ezio and Machiavelli, impatient and tired, pushed past anyway, and encountered Charlotte in her piano nobile, engrossed in packing. Huge chests full of costly linen and books and jewellery stood about the half-empty room, and in a corner, the confused little 4-year-old Louisa, Cesare's only legitimate heir, played with a wooden doll. "You are damned impertinent," said the cold-looking blonde who confronted them, her dark brown eyes flashing fire. "We have the imprimatur of the Pope himself," lied Ezio. "Here is his warrant." He held up a blank parchment, from which impressive-looking seals hung. "Bastards," said the woman coolly. "If you think I know where Cesare is imprisoned, you are fools. I never want to see him again, and I pray that none of his sang maudit has passed into the veins of my innocent little daughter." "We also seek Micheletto," said Machiavelli, implacably. "That Catalan peasant," she spat. "How should I know?" "Your husband told you how he might escape if taken," suggested Machiavelli. "He depended on you." "Do you think so? I don't. Perhaps Cesare confided in one of his dozens of mistresses. Perhaps the one that gave him the malatia venerea. I never touched him after the first pustules appeared, and he at least had the decency to keep away from me and wallow in the gutter with his whores from then on. And father 11 brats by them. At least I am clean, and my daughter too. As you see, I am getting out of here. France is a far better country than this wretched hellhole. I'm going back to La Motte Feuilly." "Not to Navarre?" asked Machiavelli slyly. "I see you are trying to trick me." She turned her cold, bony face towards them, and Ezio noticed that her beauty was marred, or enhanced, by a dimple in the middle of her chin. "I do not choose to go to that province merely because my brother married the heiress to the throne and thereby became king." "Does your brother remain faithful to Cesare?" asked Ezio. "I doubt it. Why don't you stop wasting my time and go and ask him?" "Navarre is far away." "Exactly, which is why I wish you and your saturnine friend were on your way there. And now it is late and I have work to do. Please leave." "A wasted day," commented Machiavelli as they took to the streets again, the shadows lengthening. "I don't think so. We know that none of those closest to Cesare are harbouring or protecting him." Ezio paused. "All the most important women in his life hated him, and even Julia had no time for Rodrigo." Machiavelli grimaced. "Imagine being fucked by a man old enough to be your grandfather." "Well, she didn't do too badly out of it." "We still don't know where Cesare is. Use the apple." "No, not yet. We must stand on our own feet." "Well," sighed Machiavelli, "at least God gave us good minds." At that moment, one of Machiavelli's spies came running up out of breath. He was a small, bald man with alert eyes and a wild face. "Bruno," said Machiavelli, surprised and concerned. "Maestro," panted the man, "thank God I found you." "What is it?" "The Borgia diehards. They sent someone to follow you and Maestro Ezio." "And?" "Sure that you were out of the way. They have taken Claudia." "My sister! Sweet Jesus! How?" gasped Ezio. "She was in the square outside St. Peter's. You know those rickety wooden colonnades the Pope wants to tear down? Get on with it. They took her. She was organising her girls, getting them to infiltrate." "Where is she now?" "They have a hideout in the Prati, just to the east of the Vatican. That's where they've taken her." Bruno quickly gave them the details of where Claudia was being held prisoner. Ezio looked at Machiavelli. "Let's go," he said. "At least we've found out where they are," said Machiavelli, dryly as ever, as the two of them bounded up to the rooftops again, running and leaping across Rome until they came to the Tiber, where they crossed the Ponte della Rovere and made haste again towards their goal. The place Machiavelli's spy Bruno had indicated was a ramshackle villa just north of the Prati district market. But its crumbling stucco belied a brand-new iron-bound front door, and the grilles on the windows were new and freshly painted. Before Machiavelli could stop him, Ezio had gone up to the door and hammered on it. The Judas set into it, opened, and a beady eye regarded them. Then, to their amazement, the door swung smoothly back on well-oiled hinges. They found themselves in a nondescript courtyard where there was no one about. Whoever had opened the door, and closed it firmly behind them, had disappeared. There were doors on 3 sides of the yard. The one opposite the entrance was open, and above it was a tattered banner bearing a black bull in a golden field. "Trapped," said Machiavelli succinctly. "What weapons do you have?" Ezio had his trusty hidden blade, his sword, and his dagger. Machiavelli carried a light sword and a stiletto. "Come in, gentlemen. You're most welcome," said a disembodied voice from a window overlooking the courtyard somewhere high up in the wall above the open door. "I think we have something to trade with." "The Pope knows where we are," retorted Machiavelli loudly. "You are lost. Give yourselves up. The cause you serve is dead." A hollow laugh was his rejoinder. "Is it indeed? I think not. But come in. We knew you'd take the bait. Bruno's been working for us for a year now." "Bruno?" "Treachery runs in families, and dear Bruno's is no exception. All Bruno wanted was a little more cash than you were giving him. He's worth it. He managed to inveigle Claudia here in the hope of meeting one of the English cardinals. They sit on the fence, as the English always do, and Claudia hoped to swing him to your side and get a little information out of him. Unfortunately, Cardinal Shakeshaft met with a terrible accident. He was run over by a carriage and died on the spot. But your sister Ezio is still alive, just, and I'm sure she's longing to see you." "Calma," said Machiavelli as the 2 men looked at each other. Ezio's blood boiled. He'd spent a day trying to trace the diehards, only to be led straight to them. He dug his fingernails into his palms. "Where is she, bastardi?" he yelled. "Come in." Cautiously, the 2 assassins approached the dark entrance. There was a dimly lit hall in whose centre, on a plinth, was a bust of Pope Alexander VI by Adchignono, as Machiavelli guessed. The coarse features, the hooked nose, the weak chin, the fat lips, done to the life. There was no other furniture, and again there were 3 doors leading off the 3 walls facing the entrance. Only that facing the entrance was open. Ezio and Machiavelli made for it, and, passing through the door, found themselves in another bleak room. There was a table on which various rusty surgical instruments were arrayed on a stained cloth, glittering under the light of a single candle. Next to it was a chair, and on it Claudia was seated, half undressed and bound, her hands in her lap, her face and breasts bruised, a gag in her mouth. 3 men detached themselves from the shadows that obscured the back wall. Ezio and Machiavelli were aware of others too, men and women, behind them and on either side. Those they could see in the dim light wore the now grubby colours of the Borgia, and all were heavily armed. Claudia's eyes spoke to Ezio's. She managed to wrestle her branded finger free enough to show him. She had not given in despite the torture. She was a true assassin. Why had he ever doubted her? "We know how you feel about your family," said the chief diehard, a gaunt man of perhaps 50 summers whom Ezio did not recognize. "You let your father and brothers die. Your mother we need not bother about, as she's dying anyway. But you can still save your sister, if you wish. She's already well struck in years and doesn't even have any children, so perhaps you won't bother." Ezio controlled himself. "What do you want?" "In exchange, I want you to leave Rome. Why don't you go back to Monteriggioni and build the place up again? Do some farming. Leave the power game to those who understand it." Ezio spat. "Oh dear," said the thin man. He seized Claudia by the hair and, producing a small knife, cut her left breast. Claudia screamed. "She's damaged goods at the moment, but I'm sure she'll recover under your tender care. I'll take her back, and then I'll kill you, slowly." "Ezio Auditore, I gave you a chance, but you threatened me, and you're in no position to threaten. If there's any killing to be done, it will be by me. Forget Monteriggioni. A sophisticated lady like Madonna Claudia would doubtless hate it there anyway. Your destiny is here, to die in this room." The men and women on each side closed in, drawing swords. "I told you, we're trapped," said Machiavelli. "At least we found the bastards," replied Ezio, as each man looked the other in the eye. "Here." He flung a handful of poisoned darts to his companion. "Make them work." "You didn't tell me you came prepared." "You didn't ask." "I did. Shut up." Ezio fell into a crouch as the diehards advanced. Their leader held the thin knife to Claudia's throat. "Let's go." As one, they drew their swords, and with their other hands they threw the poison darts with deathly aim. The Borgia supporters toppled on either side as Machiavelli closed in, slicing and slashing with his sword and dagger, pushing against the diehards who tried to crush him, in vain, by force of numbers. Ezio had one goal: to kill the thin man before he could rip open Claudia's throat. He leapt forward, seizing the man by the gizzard, but his adversary was as slippery as an eel and wrenched himself to one side without letting go of his victim. Ezio finally managed to wrestle him to the floor and, grasping his right hand in his left, forced the point of the thin knife the man was holding close to his own throat. Its point touched the jugular artery. "Have mercy," babbled the die-hard leader. "I served a cause I thought was true." "How much mercy would you have shown my sister?" asked Ezio. "You filth! You are finished." There was no need to release the hidden blade. "I told you it would be a slow death," said Ezio, drawing the knife down to the man's groin. "But I am going to be merciful." He slid the knife back up and sliced the man's throat open. Blood bubbled in the man's mouth. "Bastardo!" he gurgled. "You will die by Micheletto's hand." "Requiescat in pace," said Ezio, letting the man's head fall, though for once he spoke the words without much conviction. The other diehards lay dead or dying about them, as Machiavelli and Ezio hastened to untie the harsh cords that bound Claudia. She had been badly beaten, but the diehards had at least drawn a line at leaving her honour intact. "Oh, Ezio, are you all right?" "I hope so." "Come on. We must get out of here." "Gently." "Of course." Ezio took his sister in his arms, and, followed by a sombre Machiavelli, walked out into the dying light of day. "Well," said Machiavelli, "at least we know for sure that Micheletto is still alive." Chapter 51. "We've found Micheletto," said La Volpe. "Where?" Ezio's voice was urgent. "He's holed up in Zagarolo, just to the east of here." "Let's get him, then. Not so fast. He's got contingents from the Romagna towns still loyal to Cesare. He'll put up a fight, La Volpe warned. Let him. We'll have to organise. Then let's do it, now. Ezio, with Machiavelli and La Volpe, summoned a meeting on Tiber Island that night. Bartolomeo was still in Ostia, watching the port, and Claudia was resting up at the Rosa in Fiore, tended by her ailing mother after her terrible ordeal. There were enough thieves and recruits to muster a force of 100 men and women able to bear arms, and there was no need of other condottieri to back them up. He's encamped in the old gladiatorial school, Ludus Magnus, and he's got maybe 250 men with him. What does he intend to do? Ezio wondered. No idea. Break out, head for safety in the north with the French, who knows? Whatever his plans are, let's nip them in the bud. By early dawn, Ezio had gathered a mounted force. They rode out the short distance to Tagarolo and had surrounded Micheletto's encampment by sunrise. Ezio bore his crossbow on one arm, over the bracer, and on the other his poison blade. There would be no quarter taken, though he wanted to take Micheletto alive. The defenders put up a fierce fight, but in the end Ezio's forces were victorious, scattering the diehards under Micheletto's command like chaff. Among the wounded, dead, and dying, Micheletto stood proud, defiant to the last. "We take you, Micheletto da Correia, as our prisoner," said Machiavelli. "No more shall you infect our nation with your schemes." "Chains will never hold me," snarled Micheletto, "any more than they will hold my master." They took him in chains to Florence, where he took up residence in the cells of the Signoria, in the very cell where Ezio's father Giovanni had spent his last hours. There, the governor of the city, Piero Soderini, together with his friend and adviser Amerigo Vespucci and Machiavelli, interrogated and tortured him. But they could get nothing out of him, and so, for the moment, they left him to rot. His days as a killer seemed done. Ezio, for his part, returned to Rome. "I know you are a Florentine at heart, Niccolo," he told his friend at their parting, "but I shall miss you." "I am also an assassin," replied Machiavelli, "and my first loyalty will always be to the Brotherhood. Let me know when you next have need of me, and I will come to you without delay. Besides," he added darkly, "I haven't given up all hope of squeezing information out of that vile man." "I wish you luck," said Ezio. He wasn't so sure they'd break him. Micheletto might be an evil man, but he was also very strong-willed. Chapter 52. "Ezio, you must put Micheletto out of your mind," Leonardo told him, as they sat in the studio in Rome. "Rome is at peace. This Pope is strong. He has subdued the Romagna. He is a soldier as much as he is a man of God, and perhaps, under him, all Italy will find peace at last. And although Spain controls the south, Ferdinand and Isabella are our friends." Ezio knew that Leonardo was happy in his work. Pope Julius had employed him as a military engineer, and he was tinkering with a host of new projects, though he sometimes pined for his beloved Milan, which was still in French hands, and talked in his more depressed moments of going to Amboise, where he had been offered all the facilities he needed whenever he wanted them. He often talked of going once he had finished Pope Julius's commissions. As for the Romagna, Ezio's thoughts turned often to Caterina Sforza, whom he still loved. A letter he'd received from her told him that she was now involved with the Florentine ambassador. Ezio knew her life remained in turmoil, and that, despite Julius's support, she had been dismissed from Forli by her own people on account of the cruelty she had displayed when putting down the rebellion against her late intractable second husband, Girolamo Feo, and that she was growing old in retirement now, in Florence. At first his letters to her were angry, then remonstrative, then pleading, but she replied to none of them. and finally he accepted that she had used him, and that he would never see her again. Thus it was with relationships between men and women. The lucky ones last, but too often when they end for good, and deep intimacy is replaced by a desert. Ezio was hurt and humiliated, but he didn't have time to wallow in his misery. His work in Rome consolidating the Brotherhood and above all holding it in readiness kept him busy. I believe that as long as Micheletto lives, he will do his best to escape, free Cesare Borgia, and help him rebuild his forces, Ezio maintained. Leonardo had problems of his own regarding his feckless boyfriend Salai, and barely listened to his old friend. "No one has ever escaped from the prison in Florence," he said. "Not from those cells." "Why don't they kill him?" "They still think they might get something out of him, though personally I doubt it," said Leonardo. "In any case, the Borgia are finished. You should rest. Why don't you take your poor sister and return to Monteriggioni?" "She has grown to love Rome and would never return to such a small place now. And in any case, the Brotherhood's new home is here." This was another sadness in Ezio's life. After an illness, his mother Maria had died. Claudia, after her abduction at the hands of the Borgia diehards, had given up the Rosa in Fiore, and the brothel was now controlled by Julius's own network of spies, who used different girls. La Volpe had negotiated with his colleague Antonio in Venice to send Rosa, now older and statelier, but no less fiery than she had been when Ezio knew her in La Serenissima, to Rome to run it. There was also the problem of the apple. So much had changed, and when Ezio was summoned to the Vatican for an interview with the Pope, he was unprepared for what he would hear. "I'm intrigued by this device you've got," said Julius, coming, as always, straight to the point. "What do you mean, Your Holiness?" The Pope smiled. "Don't prevaricate with me, my dear Ezio. I have my own sources, and they tell me you have something you call the apple, which you found under the Sistine Chapel some years ago. It seems to have great power." Ezio's brain raced. How had Julius found out about the apple? Had Leonardo told him? Leonardo could be curiously innocent at times, and he had wanted a new patron very badly. "It was vouchsafed to me in a manner I find hard to explain to you, by a force from an antique world to help us. And it has, but I fear its potential. I cannot think that the hands of man are ready for such a thing, but it is known as a piece of Eden. There are other pieces, some lost to us, and others perhaps left hidden." "It sounds very useful. What does it do?" "It has the ability to control men's thoughts and desires. But that is not all. It is able to reveal things undreamed of." Julius pondered this. "It sounds as if it might be very useful to me. Very useful indeed. But it could also be used against me in the wrong hands. It is what the Borgia were misusing when they tried to gain total ascendancy. Luckily, Leonardo, to whom they gave it to research, kept its darkest secrets from them." The Pope paused once again in thought. "Then I think it better if we leave it in your care," he said at last. "If it was vouchsafed to you by such a power as you describe, it would be rash to take it away from you." He paused again. "It seems to me that when you feel you have no further use for it, you should hide it in a safe place, and maybe, if you wish, leave some kind of clue for any worthy successor, possibly a descendant of yours, who perhaps alone will be able to understand it, so that it may once more have a use in the world for future generations. For I do believe, Ezio Auditore, and perhaps I am being guided by God in this, that in our time no one but you should have custody of it. It may be that there is some unique quality, some sense, that enables you to withstand using it irresponsibly. Ezio bowed and said nothing, but in his heart he acknowledged Julius's wisdom. He couldn't have agreed more with his judgment. By the way, Julius said, I don't care for Leonardo's boyfriend. What's his name? Salai? He seems very shifty to me, and I wouldn't trust him. It's a pity Leo seems to, for apart from that one little weakness, the man is a genius. Do you know, he's developing some kind of lightweight, bulletproof armor for me. I don't know where he gets his ideas from. Ezio thought of the codex brace Leonardo had recreated for him, and he smiled to himself. Well, why not? Now he could guess the source of the Pope's information about the apple, and he knew that Julius had revealed it deliberately. Fortunately, Salai was more of a fool than a knave, but he'd have to be watched all the same and, if necessary, removed. After all, he knew what the nickname Salai meant. Little Satan. Chapter 53. Ezio made his way back to Leonardo's studio soon after his audience with the Pope, but he failed to find Salai at home, and Leonardo was shamefaced about him. He had sent Salai into the country, and no amount of persuasion would get him to reveal where. This would have to be a problem for La Volpe and his Thieves' Guild to deal with. It was clear that Leonardo was embarrassed. Perhaps he would learn to keep his mouth shut in front of the boy in future, for he knew that Ezio could get Leonardo into a deal of trouble. Fortunately, Leonardo was still more of a help than a hindrance, and a good friend too, and Ezio made this very clear to him. But if there were any more breaches of security, well, no one was indispensable. Leonardo wanted to make it up to Ezio, though. I've been thinking about Cesare, he said, with his usual eagerness. Oh? In fact, I'm very glad you've come. I found someone I think you should meet. Does he know where Cesare is? Asked Ezio. If he did, thought Ezio, Micheletto would cease to matter. If he didn't, Ezio might even consider letting Micheletto escape from prison, for Ezio knew the Signoria well, and using the man to lead him to his master. It was a dangerous plan, he knew, but he wasn't going to use the apple except as a last resort. He found the burden of the piece of Eden increasingly disturbing, having had a series of strange dreams of countries and buildings and technology that couldn't possibly exist. Then he remembered the vision of the castle, the remote castle in a foreign land. That, at least, was a recognizable building of his own time. But where could it be? Leonardo brought him back from his musings. I don't know if he knows where Cesare is, but he's called Gaspar Torreia, and he was Cesare's personal physician. He's got some ideas I think are interesting. Shall we go and see him? Any lead is a good one. Dottore Torreia received them in a spacious surgery on the Apennine, whose ceiling was hung with herbs, but also with strange creatures such as dried bats, the little corpses of desiccated toads, and even a small crocodile. Torreia was wizened and a little bent in the shoulders, but he was younger than he looked. His movements were quick, almost lizard-like, and the eyes behind his spectacles were bright. He was also another Spanish expatriate, but he was reputed to be brilliant, so Pope Julius had spared him. He was, after all, a scientist with no interest in politics. What he was interested in, and talked about at length, was the new disease. You know, both my former master and his father Rodrigo had it. It's very ugly indeed in its final stages, and I believe it affects the mind, and may have left both Cesare and the former pope affected in the brain. Neither had any sense of proportion. and it may still be strong in Cesare, wherever they've put him. Do you have any idea? My guess is somewhere as far away as possible, and in a place he could never escape from. Ezio sighed. So much was surely obvious. I have called the disease the morbus gallicus, the French disease, Dr. Torreya plunged on enthusiastically. Even the present Pope has it in the early stages, and I'm treating him. It's an epidemic, of course. We think it came from Columbus's sailors, and probably Vespucci's too, about 7 or 8 years ago, when they brought it back from the New World. Why call it the French disease, then? Asked Leonardo. Well, I certainly don't want to insult the Italians, and the Portuguese and the Spanish are our friends, but it broke out first among French soldiers in Naples. It starts with lesions on the genitals, and it can deform the hands, the back, and the face, indeed the whole head. I'm treating it with mercury to be drunk or rubbed on the skin, but I don't think I've found a cure. That is certainly interesting, said Ezio. But will it kill Cesare? I don't know. Then I must still find him. Fascinating, said Leonardo, excited by yet another new discovery. There is something else I've been working on, said Torreya, which I think is even more interesting. What is it? Asked his fellow scientist. It's this, that people's memories can be passed down, preserved, from generation to generation in the bloodline, rather like some diseases. I like to think I'll find a cure for morbus gallicus, but I feel it may be with us for centuries. What makes you say that? Said Ezio, strangely disturbed by the man's remark about memories being passed down through the generations. Because I believe it's transmitted in the first instance, through sex, and we'd all die out if we had to do without that. Ezio grew impatient. Thank you for your time, he said. Don't mention it, replied Torreya. And by the way, if you really want to find my former master, I think you could do worse than look in Spain. In Spain? Where in Spain? The doctor spread his hands. I'm a Spaniard, so is Cesare. Why not send him home? It's just a hunch. I'm sorry I can't be more specific. Ezio thought it would be like looking for a needle in a haystack. But it may be a start. Chapter 54. Ezio no longer kept the location of his lodgings a total secret, but only a few knew where they were. One of them was Machiavelli. One night, Ezio was awoken by him at 4 a.m. when there was a deliberate, urgent knocking at the door. Niccolo, what are you doing here? Ezio was instantly alert, like a cat. I've been a fool. What happened? You were working in Florence. You can't be back so soon. Ezio already knew something grave must have happened. I have been a fool, Machiavelli repeated. What's going on? In my arrogance, I kept Micheletto alive, sighed Machiavelli, in a secure cell to question him. You'd better tell me what's going on. He has escaped on the eve of his execution. From the Signoria? How? Over the roof. Borgia diehards climbed onto it during the night and killed the guards. Then they lowered a rope. The priest who gave him his last confession was a Borgia sympathizer. He's being burnt at the stake today, and he smuggled a file into his cell. Micheletto sawed through just one bar on the window. He's a big man, but it was enough for him to squeeze out and climb up. You know how strong he is. By the time the alarm was raised, he was nowhere to be found in the city. We must seek him out, and... Ezio paused, suddenly seeing an advantage in this adversity. Having found him, see where he runs. He may yet lead us to Cesare. He is insanely loyal, and without Cesare's support his own power is worthless. I have light cavalry scouring the countryside even now, trying to hunt him down. But there are plenty of small pockets of Borgia diehards, like those who rescued him, willing to shelter him. I think he's in Rome. That's why I've come here. Why Rome? We have been too complacent. There are Borgia supporters here too. He will use them to make for Ostia and try to board a ship there. Bartolomeo is in Ostia. No one will escape him and his condottieri there. I'll send a rider to alert him. But where will Micheletto go? Where else but Valencia, his hometown? Ezio, we must be sure. We must use the apple now, this minute, to see if we can locate him.